It started with a broken-down car on the edge of a forgotten town. A wealthy CEO, stranded and furious. A single mother, covered in grease, offering help without hesitation. But what happened next wasn't just an unexpected encounter. It was the unraveling of a buried promise. Because when he saw the old ring on her finger, he froze. Why did this stranger wear the ring he thought was lost 2 decades ago? Who was she really, and what dark truths had his family buried beneath money, power, and silence? This isn't just a story about a mechanic and a millionaire. It's about the memory of a promise never kept, a ring that refused to be forgotten, and 2 lives, forever connected by blood, by pain, and by the truth the world tried to erase. What would you do if the person you left behind turned out to be your greatest reckoning? And how do you make things right when the cost of truth might destroy everything you've built? If you believe that some promises are too powerful to die, like this video, share it with someone who still believes in justice, and subscribe to our channel to follow every beat of this unforgettable journey. Ready? Let's begin. The sky over Riverton, Montana, was a canvas of thick gray clouds. Snow had been falling since dawn, blanketing the entire landscape in layers of white silence. The wind howled in the distance like a lonesome wolf, and the only thing that broke the stillness of the snow-covered highway was the faint sound of tires skidding, then stopping. A sleek, matte black electric car, too elegant, too out of place for these rural roads, sat stranded near a frozen embankment. Steam hissed gently from the hood. The driver, wearing a designer wool coat and leather gloves, stepped out. Squinting through the flurry, he tapped at his phone. No signal. No way, he muttered under his breath, staring at the dying battery on his touchscreen. He kicked at the snow in frustration, his breath rising in sharp, impatient clouds. Daniel Thompson wasn't used to being stuck, let alone helpless. CEO of one of the fastest-growing tech corporations in the country, his life was run by algorithms, assistants, and perfect timing. But none of that mattered now. Not here. He cursed the GPS that led him through the back road, promising it would shave off 20 minutes. Now he was 30 miles away from the nearest charging station, and the only thing surrounding him was a forest blanketed in snow. Then, from the bend behind him, came a faint mechanical growl, an old engine, struggling but persistent. A beat-up Ford F-150 faded red with dents on the sides. Crawled up the icy road, the truck stopped a few feet behind him, and the driver's door creaked open. She stepped out. Emily Carter, wrapped in a thick olive-green parka and worn-out boots. Her curly brown hair tucked into a knit cap looked like someone who had lived in this kind of weather her entire life. She walked toward him with a steady stride, her boots crunching over the snow. "You all right?" she asked, her voice calm, not rushed. Daniel blinked. He wasn't used to being asked that, let alone by a stranger in a place like this. "My car died," he replied stiffly. She tilted her head, observing the vehicle. "Doesn't look built for mountain roads. You from out of town?" Daniel hesitated. "You could say that." She nodded and walked past him, popping the hood of his car without asking. Steam puffed up. She leaned in slightly, then stepped back. "Coolant's frozen. Battery's nearly gone, too. You're lucky you didn't stall in deeper snow. You'd be stuck overnight." Daniel glanced at her again. She wasn't young, probably mid-30s. No makeup, no pretense, and she looked at him the same way she looked at the engine pragmatic, unfazed. "I can give you a ride into town," she said, brushing her gloves together. unless you'd rather freeze with your car." He paused for a moment, then reluctantly nodded. "Thanks." She walked back to her truck, opened the passenger door. "Name's Emily," she added. "Daniel," he replied as he climbed in. The truck's heater groaned as it came to life, blowing out faint warmth. A child's drawing was pinned to the dashboard. Stick figures, a house, a heart. Daniel stared at it. "You have a kid?" he asked. Emily nodded as she steered the truck carefully back onto the road. "Daughter, 11, smart as a whip, talks too much, like her dad used to." She said it simply. No sadness, just fact. They drove in silence for a few minutes, the landscape outside an endless blur of white trees and icy fences. Emily's truck creaked with every bump, but she drove with confidence, one hand on the wheel, the other occasionally adjusting the heater knob. Then Daniel noticed it. Her hand, the ring, simple silver band, a small emerald green stone in the center. The light caught it just enough to glimmer, and in that brief glimmer, something twisted in Daniel's chest. Something old. Something forgotten. The ring looked familiar. He looked away, trying to push the strange feeling aside. But it lingered. He finally broke the silence. "That ring. Is it a family heirloom?" Emily looked over at him, then back to the road. She flexed her fingers slightly, as if subconsciously hiding the ring. "It's something someone gave me a long time ago, before the world got complicated." Her voice lowered at the end, like a door gently closing on a memory. Daniel didn't push further, but his mind was already racing. Why did that ring stir something inside him? Why did it feel like a whisper from the past? They reached the edge of Cold River, the small snow-laden town nestled between the hills. A weathered gas station, a shuttered bakery, a church steeple coated in frost. Emily turned into the parking lot of a modest brick building with a small sign, "Cold River Community Clinic." "This is where I work," she said, pulling the handbrake. "I've got a cot in the back for emergencies. You can warm up while I call someone to help tow your car." Daniel stepped out of the truck, still shaken by the strange sense of déjà vu. He paused before following her. The ring, the blizzard, the woman who treated him like a human instead of a headline. This wasn't just coincidence, but it would take more than one snowstorm to uncover the layers buried beneath that glimmering emerald. The clinic was quiet, too quiet. Emily pushed the heavy door open with her shoulder, letting a gust of warm air and the scent of antiseptic fill the space. The hallway lights flickered gently as they stepped inside. Daniel looked around. Clean, worn, functional. There was a row of old chairs along the wall, a poster about flu shots peeling slightly at the edge. A knitted shawl hung behind the reception desk, likely left there by a patient or maybe by Emily herself. "This way," she said, motioning toward a door marked "Staff Only." Daniel followed, glancing at her with a curious mix of gratitude and caution. Something about this place reminded him of a time when life was simpler, before his name started appearing in headlines, before boardrooms and launch events. In the back room, there was a small cot, a foldable table, and a heater humming in the corner. Emily handed him a thick wool blanket. "You can stay here until the tow truck comes," she said. "I called Tommy the only guy in town with a winch strong enough to pull that battery sled of yours off the road." Daniel sat on the cot. "Thanks," he said, then hesitated. "You didn't have to stop." "I know," she replied, sitting on the edge of a desk and crossing her arms. "But someone once told me that just because the world stopped caring doesn't mean we have to." Her eyes lingered on the floor after she spoke. Daniel tilted his head. "Sounds like something someone told you a long time ago." She didn't answer. The silence between them thickened, not uncomfortable, but filled with something else, like there was a current running beneath their words, something neither could name yet. So, Daniel broke the silence. This ring. He wasn't sure why he brought it up again, but that feeling from the truck hadn't left him. Emily glanced down at her hand. "It's nothing," she said, then corrected herself. "No, that's not fair. It's something. Just something that belongs to the past. You said someone gave it to you." Daniel pressed, softly this time. She nodded. "I was a kid. I was living at Cold River Children's Home, back when it still existed, before the state shut it down." Daniel's breath caught. Cold River Children's Home. He knew that name, or thought he did. A flash of a memory sparked in his mind. Cold floors, wooden bunk beds, snow outside the window, and the sound of a child laughing beside him. "You were there?" he asked quietly. "For 5 years." Emily looked up at him now. "Got placed in foster care at 11. The rest is what it is." Daniel's jaw tightened. The name tugged at a corner of his memory he hadn't visited in decades. Could it be, I think? He began slowly. "I think I was there too." Emily blinked. "What I don't remember everything," Daniel admitted, rubbing the back of his neck. "But I remember a girl. Curly hair. Always wore her jacket like a cape. We carved a bird out of wood together once. She said if you learn to carve something small with care, you can fix anything." Her eyes widened. It was like someone had punched the breath out of her. "You," she whispered. "You're Danny." That name hadn't crossed his ears in more than 25 years. His gaze locked with hers, and suddenly, all the time that had passed evaporated between them. He nodded slowly. "That's what they called me." Emily stood up, pacing toward the window, arms tightly folded. She wasn't crying, but something in her body shook as if holding in a storm. "I thought you were adopted," she said, her voice low. "They said you got out. You were the lucky one." Daniel stood as well, uncertain. "I don't remember leaving. I just remember one day everything changed. I woke up in a new house, new last name, new life." He paused. "I think my family tried to erase everything that came before." Emily finally turned around. "Did they also erase the part where you promised to come back?" Her voice wasn't angry, it was wounded, quiet, accusatory only in its ache. Daniel's chest tightened. "I didn't know." He said. A pause. "I didn't remember." Another pause. "I'm sorry." The words sounded small in the stillness. Inadequate. Emily walked back toward the desk and pulled open the bottom drawer. She rifled through a folder and drew out an old photo. It was faded, but clear enough. 2 kids, sitting on a wooden fence, a carved bird in between them. Daniel took the photo with shaking hands. "I kept it," she said, voice barely above a whisper. "Even after the orphanage was shut down, even after my foster family used me like a maid, even after I ran away, because that was the last time someone made me feel seen." His eyes met hers, and in that moment, the weight of everything he hadn't known began to crash over him like a rising tide. The billions, the headlines, the empire his last name represented. And yet here was the real legacy he had left behind, buried in snow and silence. The snow had slowed to a gentle whisper by the time Daniel stepped outside for air. The photograph still trembled in his hands. He stared down at it, the boy with the crooked smile, the girl with wind-tangled hair, their fingers brushing against a tiny wooden bird that sat between them like a secret. It was like looking through a window into another life, a forgotten one, a real one. He closed his eyes, and suddenly he could hear it. The laughter, the chill of that first snow day, the creak of old floorboards under their feet, her voice childlike and warm saying, "Don't lose it, Danny. That ring means you have to come back." Daniel's breath caught in his throat. He opened his eyes again. The photograph blurred. Back inside, Emily was washing her hands at the sink, her shoulders slightly hunched. There was something in her silence that said, "Don't say sorry again." Not yet. Daniel returned to the room, quietly placing the photo back on her desk. He hesitated, then asked softly, "Why did you keep the ring?" Emily didn't look at him. Her voice came out steady, like she'd rehearsed it in her mind 1,000 times, because it was the only thing in my life that ever felt like a promise. She dried her hands slowly, folded the towel, placed it back. For a long time, I thought maybe I made it all up, she continued, that maybe the boy who said he'd come back didn't exist, that I imagined the whole thing, just to survive another night in a place where no one remembered your name. Daniel stepped closer, cautiously. And when I started seeing your name on tech articles, magazine covers, interviews with presidents and billionaires, I told myself, that can't be him. She finally turned to face him. But it was. He nodded. Shame flickered behind his eyes. I wish I could explain what happened, but the truth is, I don't even know. One day I was just gone, sent to Boston, adopted, private school, new last name, new life, no explanations. My past just vanished. My parents never talked about it. Every time I asked, they shut me down. His voice cracked slightly. They called it protecting me, said it was best to forget. Emily leaned against the counter, arms folded. Her tone wasn't angry. It was weary, convenient for them. But we didn't get that luxury. Daniel. He flinched. First time she used his name like that. Heavy. Measured? A line drawn? You got a family, a mansion, a future. I got a social worker who forgot my birthday. She took a breath, trying to soften the edge, but the truth hung there like a weight between them. Daniel stepped forward again. I didn't know. I swear to you, I didn't know they were hiding it. But now that I do, I can't just ignore it. He looked down at the ring again. I gave that to you when we were what? 10-11, Emily said. Just before you left. I remember now. I'd found it in the lost and found box. Said it looked like something from a fairy tale. You said it was too fancy for a girl like you. Emily cracked a half smile. And you said, every story starts with something lost. Daniel laughed quietly, rubbing his forehead. Wow, I said that you did, she replied. And then you gave it to me and made me promise to keep it. Said you'd come back for it. The smile faded, and I waited, she said, for a year, then 2, then 5, then I stopped. Silence. Daniel didn't speak. He couldn't. He could feel the weight of every year she waited, every unanswered question, every winter that came and went without him. And all the while, he was building an empire with no memory of the girl who gave him his first lesson in kindness. I don't expect you to make it right, Emily said after a while, more softly now. This isn't a movie. We don't tie it up in a neat bow. He looked at her. But I want to try. Emily shook her head slowly. You can't fix the past. Daniel? No. He agreed, his voice lower. But maybe I can face it. He paused. Can I ask you something else? She nodded cautiously. Do you know what happened to the orphanage? Emily's expression shifted. Her eyes clouded, not just with memory, but with a kind of guarded sorrow. They shut it down a year after you left. Said it was due to budget cuts. But that was only part of it. Daniel leaned in, curious. Emily hesitated, then said, There were rumors that the land was sold off under the table, that a developer had ties to someone big. They flattened the whole place, built storage units over it. I never got the full story. Daniel stiffened. His father, James Thompson, had built a real estate portfolio in Montana in the late 90s. He remembered overhearing the name Cold River once. A sharp chill crawled down his spine. What's wrong? Emily asked. Daniel swallowed hard. I think I need to make a call. 6 months later, Cold River Haven opened its doors. The sky was overcast that morning, but the air held warmth. A soft breeze carried the scent of freshly laid cedar mulch, wildflowers blooming along the perimeter fence. Volunteers bustled from room to room. Banners were hung, tables set, old chairs polished until their legs shone like stories waiting to be heard. But the real beauty wasn't in the building. It was in the people. Former foster youth, single moms, social workers, teachers, veterans, local business owners, teenagers who had been counted out, children who had once been silenced. They came. They showed up not just for the ribbon-cutting ceremony, but for what it symbolized, a promise that had finally come full circle. Emily Carter stood on the steps of the main entrance, microphone in hand, her curly hair tied back with a red bandana that once belonged to her mother. Behind her, the plaque read, Cold River Haven, founded in memory of the children erased and the ones who refused to forget. Carter Thompson Legacy Project. Emily's voice rang out, strong and steady. Today isn't about reopening an old chapter, she said. It's about writing a new one. She glanced toward Sarah in the front row, holding a sign that read, My Mom Builds Safe Places. The crowd chuckled, then quieted. Emily continued, This haven exists because we chose to remember, because the truth matters more than reputation, and because healing doesn't happen by tearing people down, it happens by lifting others up. Applause rose slowly, like a tide. She smiled, then stepped aside. Daniel took her place. He wore no suit, no tie, just jeans, a gray button-up, sleeves rolled. Beside him, a small carving rested on the podium. The wooden bird now sealed in a clear box labeled First Gift. Never forgotten. He took a breath. I once believed legacy was something you inherited, he said. But now I know. Legacy is something you build. He paused, brick by brick, story by story, truth by truth. He looked at Emily, and with people who never stopped believing in it. The applause this time was louder, fiercer, filled with release. Later that afternoon, while the guests explored the classrooms, training bays, and gardens, Daniel and Emily walked the back edge of the property where an old oak tree had been planted, the same kind of tree that once stood outside Cold River Children's Home. They stopped beneath it, watching Sarah and a few other kids hang wooden charms from its lower branches. Daniel turned to Emily. You think they'll be okay? She nodded, because they're not starting from silence. Daniel reached into his pocket, pulled out the silver ring. He held it between them. I don't need this anymore, he said. Not the way I used to. Emily tilted her head. But we can't bury it either. She stepped forward, dug a small hole beneath the oak with her hand, and placed the ring gently inside. Together, they covered it. No ceremony, just meaning, a final return. That evening, as twilight turned the sky a soft violet, music played from the community hall. Children danced barefoot, teens painted murals, volunteers grilled hot dogs on the lawn. Someone passed around lemonade in paper cups. Inside, on the second floor of the admin wing, a wall had been set aside, not for donors, not for founders, but for stories, photos, names, letters, snapshots of those who had passed through the system and found their way back. At the center of it hung two framed portraits, Emily Carter and Daniel Carter, née Thompson, reunited, resilient, remembered. Below them, a quote carved into wood. Some promises are broken, but the ones that matter find their way back. Later that night, Sarah pulled Daniel aside and asked, "Uncle Danny, do you remember the story about the little carved bird?" He knelt beside her, smiling. "I do. Can you tell it again?" He looked out the window, where the last rays of sunlight brushed across the lawn, and said softly, "Once upon a time, a boy and a girl were separated. But before they were taken from each other, the boy carved a bird from wood, not to fly away, but so it would always remember the way back home." Sarah leaned in closer. "And did they find each other again?" Daniel nodded, his eyes shining. "They did. Not through magic, not through maps, but through memory and a promise that never died." Sarah grinned. "I like that ending." Daniel smiled back. "So do I." Outside, beneath the stars, the oak tree swayed gently. The wind rustled the leaves, and somewhere beneath the soil, a ring rested quietly, no longer a burden, no longer a wound, just a symbol of everything they had lost and everything they had finally found. That night, Daniel didn't sleep. He sat alone on the cot in the back room of the clinic, the scratchy wool blanket draped over his shoulders, his phone lighting up the space around him with a cold blue glow. Outside, the wind had returned, rattling the windows like an impatient question. He scrolled through old emails, corporate records, archived land transactions from the late 90s. His fingers were trembling slightly, not from the cold, but from the growing certainty that something was terribly wrong. He paused at a document from 1999. Cold River Municipal Development, Phase 1 attached, was a zoning map. A red marker blinked right where the old orphanage had stood, and at the bottom, stamped in fine print, Development Consultant James T. Thompson Holdings, his father's name. Daniel stared at it for a long time, then leaned forward, elbows on knees, phone in hand. He remembered the way his father used to talk about land, not with affection, but with strategy. Location is power. Land is leverage. People, they move. He remembered how dismissive his father had always been about his adoption, calling it a PR move when the media asked. At the time, Daniel had been too young to question it, but now, all the missing pieces were starting to rearrange. His adoption, the orphanage, the silence, and Emily left behind like a page torn from a story that no longer fit the family brand. He clenched the phone in his hand, then tapped a contact. "Kara, I need access to internal family trust records, specifically holdings in Montana between 1997 and 2002. Quietly, Kara." His assistant texted back 2 minutes later. "Understood. I'll ping our archival firm and loop you in by morning." Daniel closed his phone. The room felt smaller now, like the walls had closed in, full of questions he should have asked 20 years ago. The next morning, he met Emily by the front desk of the clinic. She had coffee in one hand and a clipboard in the other. "You look like hell," she said, not unkindly. "I've looked worse," he replied, sipping from a thermos she handed him. "Thanks." Emily glanced sideways at him. "You were up all night." "I was—" She sighed. "You found something, didn't you?" Daniel didn't answer right away. He opened the manila folder tucked under his arm and placed it on the counter. Inside was a printed map, an old one, then a copy of a memo. Emily read in silence, her brow furrowed. "This is the orphanage zoning map. And the land deal. Thompson Holdings. They bought it. Through a shell company, yes. 2 layers deep. My father's firm orchestrated the acquisition in '99. They closed the home 6 months later. The paperwork buried it under a low-yield property assessment." Emily's jaw tightened. "And that's why we were scattered. Why no one ever came back for us." Daniel looked at her. "I didn't know. I swear." "I believe you," she said, but her voice was quiet, guarded. Then her eyes landed on the memo. She pointed to a line at the bottom. "Subject to the transfer clause 46B, no registered heirs." Emily exhaled sharply. "That's not true. My mother, she had guardianship over me at the time. She was just recovering in a hospital after a car accident. She hadn't signed anything." Daniel's face went pale. "Emily, do you still have any of those records?" She nodded slowly. "Not all, but I have one thing." She walked into the back, rummaging through an old cabinet, then returned with a crumpled letter in a plastic sleeve. "This was mailed to me 8 years ago. No return address, no explanation. Just one line." Daniel held it carefully. It read, "I didn't abandon you. They forced me to disappear. Mom." He looked up at her. "Is this her handwriting? I'd know it anywhere." Emily said. "I memorized the loops of her E's, the curl of her G's. I used to trace her letters just to feel close to her after she was gone." Daniel's throat felt tight. He stared at the words again. "They forced me to disappear. Emily, I think my father forged the transfer documents." She nodded slowly, like a part of her had always known. But hearing it aloud, it was a wound ripped open again. "So he didn't just close the orphanage," she whispered. "He erased every name that could have stopped him." Daniel leaned against the counter, the weight of it crashing over him like a landslide. "I'm sorry doesn't cover this," he murmured. "No," she said, "but it's not about sorry anymore." A long silence passed between them. "Finally," Emily added, "you said you wanted to face the past. Then we go deeper. We find the original files, the proof, and if there's something hidden in those papers, we bring it to light." Daniel met her eyes. Steady, brave, still carrying the fire of the girl who used to fix broken things with a carving knife. "I'm with you," he said, and he meant it. The Thompson estate rose from the foothills like a monument to power glass, steel, and silence. Daniel hadn't been here in over a year. He used to call it home. But now, as he stood before the cold iron gate, it felt more like a museum, a place where the past had been embalmed in luxury and locked away behind security codes and curated art. The gate buzzed open. He didn't flinch when the intercom greeted him with the same mechanical politeness he remembered from childhood. "Welcome back, Mr. Thompson." No one at the house knew he was coming. He wanted it that way. Inside, the marble floors gleamed. The air smelled like citrus and distance. He walked past the grand piano, the fireplace no one used, the library filled with first editions his father never read. He found James Thompson tall, precise, tailored down to his breath on the back terrace, drinking espresso and reading the Wall Street Journal. His father looked up, momentarily surprised, but not rattled. "Well," James said, "I wasn't expecting you." "I know," Daniel replied. James gestured to a chair. Ever the gracious host, even in war. Daniel didn't sit. "I need answers," he said. James raised an eyebrow. About Daniel pulled out the folded document, the one with his father's signature at the bottom. He placed it gently on the table, like setting down a loaded gun. James didn't even blink. "You know what that is?" Daniel asked. "I sign a lot of papers," James replied. Calmly, "This one erased someone," Daniel said. "A child. A friend. Emily Carter." James exhaled. Set the paper down beside his espresso cup. "You're not seriously here to lecture me about an orphanage, are you?" Daniel's jaw tightened. "I'm here because you used your power to make her disappear. You signed her out of existence." His father's smile was faint, icy. "I did what was necessary to protect your future." "My future," Daniel's voice broke. Sharp. James stood now, unfolded himself slowly. His presence was tall, deliberate like a man always delivering a keynote. "You were a gifted boy," he said, "too gifted to be raised in that place. I saw potential. You were chosen. Daniel. Elevated." Daniel took a step closer. "By destroying someone else's story," James shrugged. "Some lives weigh less on the scale of progress. It's just the truth. She was one girl in a broken system. She was my friend. She was irrelevant." Daniel's hand slammed the table, the force making the espresso cup rattle. "Don't you dare," he said, voice low, shaking. "She waited for me. She wore that ring. She kept a photo of us like it meant something. And you," he pointed at the document, "turned her into a ghost." James's tone shifted, colder, sharper. "You think you're here on some righteous crusade. Let me ask you this. What have you built without me?" Daniel stared, heart pounding. "You wouldn't be who you are without me." James continued. "Every school, every boardroom, every investor shook your hand because you were my son. Don't pretend you got there alone." Daniel's mouth opened, but no words came. His father's voice dropped to a near whisper. "You're not angry at me. You're terrified. Because deep down, you know if you take me down, you take yourself with me." Silence. Daniel stepped back. The hurt was real, but so was the shift happening inside him. "No," he said. "Finally. That's where you're wrong." He reached into his jacket, pulled out a flash drive, and placed it on the table. "I have copies of the land transfer records, the erased resident logs, the sealed memos." His father's smile flickered, only for a second, but it was there. "I'm not here to blackmail you," Daniel said. "I'm here to tell you this ends now." James scoffed. "With what all press release?" "A heartfelt apology." "Why?" Daniel said. "With the truth. And with Emily." James narrowed his eyes. "So this is about a woman. This is about a promise," Daniel replied. "One I forgot. One she never did." He turned to leave, but then paused. "And for the record," he said over his shoulder, "you didn't make me who I am. You just taught me how to lie. She taught me how to remember." Later that night, back in Riverton, Daniel parked his car outside Emily's house. The porch light was on. A thin line of smoke curled from the chimney. He hesitated before knocking. Emily answered the door in a hoodie and jeans, hair tied up, eyes tired. Daniel didn't speak right away. He just reached into his coat pocket and pulled out the original memo, the one with her name missing, and his father's handwriting on it. He held it out. "I wanted you to see it for yourself," he said. "I wanted you to know. You were never forgotten by accident." Emily took the paper slowly, eyes scanning it. For a long time, neither of them said a word. Then she looked up at him and asked gently, "And what will you do now?" Daniel exhaled, "Anything it takes." Emily didn't sleep that night. The memo sat on her kitchen table, beneath a half-empty coffee cup. The edges were worn now, from her fingers gripping them again and again, as if she needed to feel the weight of paper to believe the truth was real. Outside, the wind howled across the snowy roofs of Riverton. Inside, the house was still, too still. She sat on the worn armchair in the corner of the living room, wrapped in an old quilt. Her daughter, Sarah, had gone to bed hours ago. The girl had asked why her mom seemed so quiet at dinner. Emily had forced a smile. Just a long day, but it wasn't just the day. It was the weight of 20 years that had come crashing through the door in the form of a man she used to know and the empire he came from. She looked down at her hand again. The ring was still there, worn now, dulled over time, but the stone still caught the light in just the right way. It had always been a symbol of memory, of something pure, but now it was heavier than ever, like a chain around her finger. Was she really ready to reopen that part of her life? Could she trust him? Or was Daniel Thompson still just the echo of a promise he never meant to keep? Emily closed her eyes and let herself remember. The first night they met at the orphanage, the way he used to braid little sticks into strange animal shapes, how he snuck a piece of chocolate into her coat on her birthday, the way he said, "I'll come back," without looking back. And then, nothing. Just silence. For years. She had told herself she didn't need closure. She had built her life from the ground up. A job, a daughter, a place in the world where she mattered not because someone saw her, but because she never stopped seeing others. But now, he was back. And she could see in his eyes that he remembered, that he was broken in a way he hadn't been before, that he wanted to make things right. But intentions weren't enough. Trust had to be earned. Across town, Daniel sat alone in his rental car, parked outside an all-night diner. He hadn't gone back to the hotel. He didn't want room service or a soft bed. He needed time, stillness, something to hold on to. His hands were wrapped around a cup of black coffee, untouched. His phone buzzed beside him, an email from his legal counsel, a request from a board member, a media alert about his absence from a scheduled tech forum. He ignored them all. He had built an empire on momentum, but now, all he wanted was the truth to stop spinning. He looked at the drive on the dashboard, the one containing copies of everything he found: land deeds, forged documents, transfer records, emails, proof that his last name was not built on legacy, but on silence. He whispered to himself, barely audible, "How did I never know?" The truth settled around him like snow. He had lived so long in the image of his father's greatness that he had forgotten to ask what it cost to build that image. He reached for his phone, started to type, stopped, then typed again. "Emily, I don't expect forgiveness. I don't expect you to believe in me again. But I believe in what we had. And what was taken from you, taken from us. That matters more than anything I've built. I'm not here to fix you. I'm here to stand beside you. If you let me." Daniel. He stared at the message, then deleted it. Instead, he hit record and let his voice say the words instead low. Tired, human. He sent the voice memo to her phone and closed his eyes, leaning back against the headrest. Maybe she would hear the sincerity. Maybe she wouldn't. But he had to try. Back at the house, Emily's phone buzzed. She picked it up, saw his name. For a moment, she considered ignoring it. But something inside her, the old voice, the one that had believed in promises, once made her tap play. Daniel's voice filled the room. No music, no edit, just real. And for the first time in a long time, Emily let herself cry. Not because she was sad, but because she wasn't sure what to feel anymore. She whispered into the quiet, "I never stopped waiting. Danny, I just stopped hoping." 3 days later, a black SUV pulled up to the edge of a quiet field near the riverbed on the outskirts of Riverton. Daniel stepped out into the cold morning light. What had once been Cold River Children's Home was now a lifeless grid of gravel and concrete self-storage units, squat and gray, row after row. No laughter, no trees, no memory, only silence. He walked the length of it slowly, his shoes crunching over frost-bitten ground. He stopped where he thought the old garden used to be, where the wildflowers once peeked through snow, where Emily had buried a wooden bird behind a crooked fence, whispering, "This is where lost things go to grow again." He remembered now, not all of it, but enough to know what had been taken. He pulled out his phone and made the first call. By noon, the process had begun. He issued a formal statement through the Thompson Foundation, announcing an investigation into the acquisition of the Cold River property. He included language never before uttered by the company. "We acknowledge that mistakes were made deep, human mistakes that cost real lives their place in history. We will not hide from it. We will act." The news hit fast. Social media buzzed. Reporters called. Board members panicked. Daniel expected backlash. What he didn't expect was the flood of emails and letters from former residents of Cold River, men and women from scattered foster homes, shelters, and broken families, people who had once been just children behind a fading fence reaching out. One message read, "I always thought we were erased, but today I feel seen." Back in Riverton, Emily stood outside the clinic as the first truck arrived. A construction crew in flannel and denim stepped out. Quiet, respectful. They didn't carry bulldozers. They carried measuring tape, soil kits, survey maps. They were here to restore, not to build over. Emily watched from the sidewalk, arms folded. Daniel approached her, clipboard in hand. "This is phase 1, he said. "We're testing the land, seeing if we can safely build a youth center, something local, quiet, for kids like us." Emily raised an eyebrow. "Just like that." Daniel gave a faint smile. "Not just like that, but it's a start." She nodded slowly. "And your board, they're furious," he admitted. "But I'm the majority shareholder now. I stepped in after my father's health declined." Emily looked at him. That's what it took. Daniel's jaw tightened. "I never wanted the power," he said. "But now that I have it, I'm going to use it to undo what that power did to people like you." A long silence stretched between them. Then Emily spoke. Quieter this time. "You can't undo it. Daniel." He nodded. "But maybe I can balance the scales a little." She met his gaze. It was different now. Not just apologetic. Resolved. "You're really doing this?" she asked. "I already started," he replied. "And I want you to help." Emily blinked. Daniel pulled a folded paper from his jacket. A draft. A vision statement. Cold River Community Haven. A sanctuary for children, single parents, and those navigating the foster care system, offering shelter, mentorship, and job training rooted in real-world empathy. He held it out. "I don't know how to build this," he said, "but I think you do." Emily took the paper. her fingers brushing his. She didn't answer. Not yet. That night, after Sarah had gone to sleep, Emily sat at her kitchen table under the soft glow of a hanging bulb. She read the draft again, line by line, each word a possibility, each sentence a scar reopened but not in pain, in promise. She glanced at the ring, then pulled it off for the first time in 15 years. She held it in her palm, light glinting off its edges, then set it on the table beside the proposal. Maybe, finally, she didn't have to carry it alone. Across town, Daniel stood before a mirror. He stared at his reflection. Not the tailored suits, not the billion-dollar smile, just a man who used to be a boy with crooked teeth and a broken past. He looked down at a wooden box in his hand. Inside the carved bird, faded, nicked, still whole. He set it gently beside his phone. Tomorrow, he would meet the board, face the press, risk everything. But for tonight, he allowed himself one truth. He was not running anymore. He was returning. By the end of the week, the small town of Riverton was no longer quiet. At the edge of town, where self-storage units had once stood like gray tombstones, construction crews were now working around the clock to dismantle them. The land had been cleared, fencing removed, old soil tested. A sign went up near the road. Coming soon, Cold River Haven, a center for children, families, and the forgotten. Some people honked in support as they drove by. Others didn't. And then came the reporters. News vans parked outside the diner, the school, the town hall, microphones, cameras, questions. At first, Emily tried to stay out of it. She didn't want her face on TV, didn't want to explain 20 years of silence into a 30-second soundbite. But the truth has its own momentum, and once it's set free, it doesn't sit quietly. One afternoon, as she picked up Sarah from school, a journalist approached her in the parking lot. "Emily Carter," the woman asked, polite but firm. "You're the one who uncovered the Cold River cover-up with Daniel Thompson." "Correct." Emily stood still. "I'm not looking to make a statement, but this town is," the reporter said. "People are talking. Some think this center will bring hope. Others say it's a distraction, a stunt to clean up a billionaire's reputation. Do you have anything to say to them?" Emily looked at the woman, then glanced down at Sarah, who was holding her hand and staring up at her. And that's when she knew. She had to speak not for herself, but for the girl who used to live in silence, and the girl who now looked to her for answers. The next night, they held a town meeting at Riverton's community hall. Folding chairs, fluorescent lights, a leaky roof. But it was full. Locals from all over came, ranchers, teachers, teenagers, even former councilmen. They wanted to know what was happening, why their town was suddenly on the news, and why Emily Carter was suddenly standing at the center of it all. She stood behind the podium. No speech, no cue cards, just her voice. "When I was 11, she began, I lived at the Cold River Children's Home." A few heads nodded. Most of you probably don't remember it, or never knew it was there. But for kids like me, it was the only place we had. Until it wasn't. She took a breath. When it was sold off and shut down, no one asked where we went. We were moved, forgotten. Some of us never really came back. Silence. "I'm not here to tell you this new center will fix everything," she said. "It won't, but it will mean something. It'll be a place where kids who are left behind get a second chance." A pause. "I got mine late, but I want to make sure others don't have to wait as long." The room stayed quiet for a moment longer. Then someone clapped, then another, and another. It wasn't thunderous, but it was real. Outside the hall, Daniel leaned against a lamppost, listening through the open windows. He hadn't gone in. He wanted this moment to belong to her. When Emily stepped outside, she found him still there. "You heard every word," he said. She shrugged. "I probably said too much." He smiled gently. "You said just enough." Then his phone buzzed. He checked it. His face tightened. "What is it?" she asked. "The board just issued a press release," he said. "They're distancing the Thompson brand from the project, pulling the name, the funding, the foundation." Emily's face went cold. "They're cutting you off." Daniel nodded. "They say I've gone rogue, damaging investor confidence, playing the poverty hero." She looked at him. "What are you going to do?" He looked back at her, resolve in his voice. "Keep going." The next day, Daniel hosted a live stream. No PR team, no filter, just him, sitting in front of a plain wall, holding the carved wooden bird in his hand. He told the story of Cold River, of Emily, of the erased records, of the ring, of the promise, and of the system that failed to protect the most vulnerable. He didn't ask for donations. He asked for attention. We can't change the past, but we can decide whether we keep pretending it didn't happen. Within 48 hours, the video had over 3 million views, and something surprising happened. People cared. Donations started pouring in, not from corporations, but from former foster kids, single parents, teachers, librarians, retired nurses. Each note said something like, "I see you. Thank you for telling the truth. This is the story I never thought would be heard." Emily stood beside him as they read each message, one by one, and with each one, her doubt began to quiet. Because now, she wasn't just fixing what was broken. She was rebuilding something new. The ground was still frozen the morning they laid the first stone. There wasn't a ceremony, no press, no photographers, just a folding table, a thermos of coffee, a dozen volunteers in thick coats, and a gray slab of concrete with "Haven Begins Here" scrawled on its surface in charcoal marker. Emily stood with her hands tucked into her coat pockets, quietly watching as Sarah pressed her small palm into the wet cement. The imprints stayed, just like they'd hoped. Daniel stood a few steps back, letting the moment belong to them. He had learned, slowly, that the best kind of leadership wasn't loud. It was listening, supporting, making space. When Sarah stepped away from the stone, she looked up at him and asked, "You ever laid a stone before?" He smiled gently, "Not like this." Emily gave him a sideways glance. "You've built skyscrapers, right?" He nodded. 12 of them. She raised an eyebrow. "And this one?" He looked at the slab. "This one matters the most." That afternoon, they worked side by side, organizing supplies, sorting plans, meeting with volunteers. Emily wasn't used to having help, especially not from someone like him. But Daniel wasn't the same man who stepped out of that broken-down car weeks ago. Gone was the arrogance, the sheen of untouchable success. What remained was something quieter, humble, unpolished, human. At one point, while they were both hunched over a blueprint, Emily asked him, "Do you ever miss it?" He looked up. "Miss what?" "The life, the boardrooms, the jets, the spotlight." He paused, thinking carefully. "I miss the illusion," he said finally, "that if I just kept winning, everything else would stop hurting." She nodded, understanding more than she expected to. And now Daniel smiled faintly. Now I just want to build something that actually deserves to last." She didn't say anything, but her silence felt like trust. That evening, they sat on the back porch of Emily's house, bundled up under wool blankets. Sarah had gone to bed. The stars were sharp and clear. Daniel held the wooden bird in his hands, tracing the faded lines where a child's hands once carved. "I used to think I gave you this," he said softly. Emily turned to him. "You did?" He shook his head. "I don't think so anymore. I think you gave it to me. You just let me think it was mine." Emily smiled, the corners of her mouth tired, but kind. "You needed it more." He nodded. The silence between them stretched not awkward, but full, comfortable. Then Emily spoke. "You know, I used to think strength meant never needing anyone, but I was wrong." Daniel looked at her. "What does it mean?" Then she took a moment, then said, "Strength is knowing you can carry something alone, but choosing not to." Daniel closed his eyes. Let the words settle. Then, quietly, "Can I ask you something?" "Sure. Why didn't you ever take the ring off?" She didn't answer right away. Then because it reminded me of who I was before I got hard. Before I learned to protect myself so much, I forgot how to let people in. Daniel looked down. "You kept that part of me alive," he said, "even when I couldn't." Emily reached into her coat pocket and pulled the ring off her finger. She handed it to him. Daniel froze. "Are you sure?" She nodded. "It's your turn to keep it now." He took it, holding it like it was made of glass. The next morning, the final blueprint was approved. Cold River Haven would include a shelter for foster youth and single parents, a vocational training garage named Emily's Bay, a mentorship program run by volunteers and former foster kids, and a small studio space just for art, wood carving, and memory keeping. Daniel funded it all under a new name, the Carter Thompson Trust. Emily had insisted on the name being equal. Daniel said she deserved top billing. They compromised. And in that compromise, something else grew. Not romance. Something harder. Respect. Partnership. Redemption. It started with a phone call. Emily almost ignored. She was sorting donated winter coats in the back of the clinic when her phone buzzed. Screen lit with an unfamiliar number, Helena Regional Hospital. She stared at it for a second, thumb hovering, then answered, Emily Carter. Her heart skipped. The voice on the other end was gentle, professional, female. "This is Clara Benson from the Helena Regional Records Department. You submitted a request a few weeks ago for access to archival files related to Cold River Children's Home." Emily's breath caught. "Yes," she replied. I asked for anything with my name on it, and anyone connected to me. I found something." The woman paused, as if choosing her words with care. "It's unusual. It's not in our digital records. It was in a sealed physical file. Restricted access, not meant to be indexed." Emily sat down. "What is it?" "A letter," the woman said, "dated November 2001. Signed by someone named Lillian Hart." Emily blinked. The name rang like a bell she hadn't heard in decades. "Lillian was a nurse at Cold River," she whispered. "I believe so," Clara said. "The letter is addressed to you, but it was never sent." Emily's pulse quickened. "I'm emailing you a scanned copy now," Clara said. "You'll want to read it privately." 10 minutes later, Emily sat in her kitchen, staring at the screen. The document appeared grainy at first, scanned from yellowed paper, but the handwriting was unmistakable, loopy, neat, patient. She read, "Emily, if you're reading this, It means someone finally found the truth. I tried to protect you. I tried to protect both of you. You and Danny were closer than anyone knew. But when his adoption papers were pushed through by James Thompson, everything changed. He wasn't supposed to be taken that way, not secretly, not forcibly. I protested. I lost my job for it. I don't know how much they told you. But you weren't just friends. You were family, twins, separated at age 6 during a custody dispute gone silent. The system failed you both. I left this letter hidden in your file, hoping someday it would reach you. I'm sorry. I wish I could have done more. Lily and Emily sat frozen. The cursor blinked at the end of the letter. She didn't move. Couldn't. Twins, she remembered. A boy who always understood her before she spoke. A laugh that mirrored hers. The way they fit like two sides of something that made sense. Her hands trembled. She looked up, and there on the table, beside her mug, was the silver ring. The same one he had given her. The same one she'd just returned. And now, it meant something entirely new. That evening, Daniel returned from a site meeting at the Haven and found Emily waiting on the porch. She was holding her phone. He knew before she spoke. "What is it?" he asked. She looked at him, eyes wide, steady. She handed him the phone. Read. Daniel sat slowly on the steps, scrolled through the letter. His hand stopped moving halfway down the screen. He reread it, once, twice, then lowered the phone. Silence stretched between them, sharp, delicate. "You knew none of this?" she asked. He shook his head. His voice was raw. No, and he hadn't. Not a clue. His whole life. He thought the lost parts were just emotional. The orphanage, the memories. But now, he saw it. It wasn't just emotional. It was biological. They had taken more than his childhood. They had taken his family. "You're my sister," he said quietly. Emily exhaled. Not just a promise. Not just a friend. Daniel's voice cracked. "You're my blood." Later that night, they sat in silence by the fireplace. No words. Just firelight. Breathing. The gravity of what had been found. Emily finally spoke. "I always felt tethered to you. Even when I hated you. Even when I thought I'd buried you." Daniel swallowed hard. "I think I've spent my life trying to feel complete, and nothing ever did it." A long pause. "Until now," he added. They didn't hug. They didn't cry. They just sat. Two halves that had been torn apart by paperwork and power. Now returned. Not in some perfect cinematic ending, but in a cracked, real way. A way that mattered. In the morning, Daniel called a private investigator who had once worked for his foundation. They confirmed the nurse, Lillian Hart, had died in 2008. But before her death, she'd filed multiple sealed complaints against Thompson Adoption Services. Most had mysteriously disappeared, but one survived. It named James Thompson as the architect of selective identity management to enable closed adoptions for wealthy clients, including forced sibling separations. Daniel stared at the document. He whispered, he knew. Emily sat beside him. I think he knew more than either of us ever did. They weren't sure what to do with the truth. But one thing was certain. The ring no longer symbolized a promise made by a friend. It was a birthright, an unbroken circle between two siblings who had found their way back to each other through memory, courage, and a crack in a sealed file. Daniel had never planned to return to the Thompson estate again. Not after the last confrontation, but now, with a letter from Nurse Hart in one hand and a legally verified complaint file in the other. He stood at the grand gates of the mansion his name had once bought. The past was no longer a mystery. It was a case file. It had dates, signatures, witnesses, and motive. And most damning of all, it had James Thompson's name etched across every page like a brand. Emily had offered to go with him. He said no. This is something I have to end alone. She'd understood. But just before he left, she pressed the silver ring into his palm, whispering, "If it gets heavy, remember whose hand it used to fit." So here he was. Steel gate, cold wind, familiar silence. A butler opened the door, stiff and startled. Daniel walked in without speaking. He didn't need an invitation anymore. He found his father in the study, leaning over a chessboard and a glass of scotch in hand. James didn't look up. "So," he said, voice like gravel, "you've come to gloat." Daniel didn't speak yet. He waited until the door clicked shut behind him, then placed the documents on the chessboard directly on top of the king piece. His father finally looked up. "What is this?" Daniel didn't blink. "You know what it is." James lifted the first page, eyes scanning, still calm, still composed, until he saw Lillian Hart's signature, until he saw the phrase, "unlawful separation of biological siblings under forced adoption terms." A flicker, barely visible, but there. Panic, or something close to it. James sat back slowly. "Do you think you can break me with this?" he asked. "No," Daniel said quietly. "I think you already broke yourself. I'm just letting the light in." James laughed. "Cold, hollow. You think this makes you better than me?" "No," Daniel said again. "But it makes me free." He stepped closer, voice sharp with rising clarity. "You took my sister. You stole our childhood. You erased her so I could fit into your narrative." James's face twisted, but the mask didn't crack. "I gave you power." Daniel leaned in. "You gave me emptiness. I just didn't know it had a name." He paused. "And now I do." James stood suddenly, knocking over the glass. "You think anyone will care? This isn't the movies. There are no heroes. Just power. And those who lose it." Daniel didn't flinch. "That's where you're wrong," he said. "Because she cared. And she remembered. And now so do I." He turned to go, but stopped in the doorway. "I'm stepping down from the Thompson Foundation. Permanently." James stiffened. "You're walking away. I'm walking toward something," Daniel corrected. "Something real. Something you were too afraid to build." James opened his mouth, but Daniel was already gone. Gone from the mansion. Gone from the name. Gone from the silence that had swallowed him for most of his life. By evening, a storm swept across Montana. Wind pushed through the trees, rattled the rooftops, howled like something wild and ancient. But inside the newly renamed Cold River Haven, Emily lit the first fire in the central hearth. Volunteers gathered around the frame of what would be the community kitchen. Sarah curled up in an armchair with a mug of cocoa. Laughter and conversation echoed softly through the timber beams. Then the door opened. Daniel stood there, slightly soaked, flushed with cold, but his eyes were steady. Emily walked to meet him. "How did it go?" she asked. He pulled a document from his coat, dry, protected, his resignation, effective immediately, signed and delivered. "And this?" she asked, tapping the envelope. Daniel gave a soft smile. "Proof we've taken back our story." Later that night, Daniel and Emily sat by the window in the upper loft, overlooking the build site. Outside, floodlights shone on the cleared ground where the last of the storage units had been hauled away. Inside, the walls were still bare, the floors unfinished. But the place felt more complete than any high-rise Daniel had ever built. He handed her something small, the chess king, from his father's board. Emily looked at it, puzzled. "You kept it?" He nodded. "It's hollow," he said quietly, "like him." She turned it over in her fingers, then set it on the windowsill. "Then let it watch what real kings and queens do," she said, smiling faintly. They sat in silence, siblings reborn not by blood alone, but by truth, memory, and the shared rebuilding of something greater than themselves. The ring was no longer between them. Now it was with them, a symbol of something unbreakable. Sometimes what breaks us is not the past itself, but the silence that follows. Emily and Daniel's story wasn't just about a broken car or a forgotten promise. It was about what happens when truth rises from beneath years of silence, about how love, whether between friends or family long lost, still survives betrayal, distance, and injustice. But most of all, it was a story that reminded us power should never be built on silence, and that behind every erased name, behind every stolen childhood, is a voice that deserves to be heard. Discrimination isn't always loud. Sometimes it's hidden in adoption files, land transfers, or forgotten laws. But stories like this, stories of courage, of healing, and of standing up, they shine a light on what's been buried. And that light, that's where change begins. If this story touched you, if it made you feel something, love, anger, hope, then don't let it end here. Like this video to help the story reach more hearts. Share it with someone who still believes in justice. Subscribe to our channel to never miss another soul-stirring journey like this, because we're just getting started. In the next story, someone else will find their voice, someone else will fight back, and maybe that someone will remind you of yourself. Until then, stay kind, stay aware, and remember, sometimes the smallest ring holds the loudest truth.